You filthy woman. You stepped on my gown. Rosemary Hall servants froze. A plainly dressed maid staggered backward, one hand pressed against her cheek. Miss Evadne March stood over her in silken diamonds, eyes burning with disgust. You filthy woman, she hissed. You stepped on my gown. The maid lowered her head quietly. No tears, no apology. No one noticed a cold power in her silence. But before we continue, subscribe now and tell us in the comments where you are watching from and what time you saw this video. Tonight's story is one you will never forget. Lord Basil Thorncraft entered moments later, smiling, unaware of what had happened. Evadne rushed into his arms like an angel. The slapped maid simply adjusted her gloves. Then engines roared outside. 3 black motor cars bearing the Fairmorn crest swept into the drive. The chief steward entered, removed his hat, and bowed deeply before the humiliated maid. Your Grace. The room stopped breathing. What happened next destroyed lives. Destroy us all. Duchess's Old Fairmorn was a name spoken carefully in drawing rooms across England. Even men who commanded banks and ministers who shaped laws lowered their voices when speaking of her. Since the death of her husband, the late Duke of Fairmorn, she had ruled the family affairs alone with a calm strength few could challenge. Her London residence, Fairmorn House, stood behind iron gates in Mayfair. Its polished windows overlooking a street lined with motor cars, private footmen, and houses filled with old money. Inside were marble floors, oil portraits of stern ancestors, crystal lamps, and corridors so quiet that even whispers seemed to behave. Though powerful, Isolde had slowly withdrawn from public life after her husband's passing. She no longer attended every ball or opera night, as she once had. Younger families knew her name, her fortune, and her influence, but many had never met her face to face. They imagined a harsh old woman wrapped in black silk and bitterness. None of them knew the truth. Isolde was elegant, disciplined, and deeply observant. She had learned long ago that the world revealed itself best when it believed no one important was watching. Her greatest devotion was her only son, Lord Basil Thorncraft. Basil was 28, broad-shouldered, warm-hearted, and handsome in the easy way that made strangers trust him quickly. He had inherited his father's title prospects and his mother's refined features, yet none of her caution. He was generous with money, kind to children, and incapable of believing that beauty could hide danger. Isolde had guided him carefully since childhood, hoping experience would one day teach what warnings could not. Then Miss Evadne March entered his life. She arrived in London society like a polished jewel. Her gowns were always perfect, her smile carefully measured, and her voice soft enough to invite attention without demanding it. At dinners she spoke just enough to appear clever. At dances, she moved with graceful confidence. Mothers approved of her manners. Gentlemen praised her beauty. Newspapers mentioned her frequently beside the names of titled bachelors. Within months, Basil was completely devoted. He brought flowers to her townhouse. He rode beside her carriage in Hyde Park. He defended her before anyone who questioned her intentions. Society celebrated the romance as though it were already a wedding. Only Isolde remained unconvinced. She noticed Evadne never greeted servants unless others were watching. At charity functions her eyes wandered more toward diamonds than the suffering she claimed to pity. Her laugh warmly with dukes, lords, and wealthy widowers, yet dismissed ordinary guests with the smallest flicker of impatience. Her words were sweet, but something cold lived beneath them. When Isolde tried to speak gently to Basil, he grew irritated. You judge her because she is young, he said one evening over roast pheasant, buttered carrots, and warm bread served in the blue dining room. I judge her because I listen. You have never approved of anyone. I would approve of honesty. He pushed back his chair harder than intended. You fear losing control. The sentence struck deeper than he knew. Their conversations became strained after that. Basil visited less often. Letters replaced dinners. Fairmorn House, once filled with easy laughter between mother and son, became quiet. Then, a rainy morning, a cream envelope sealed in gold wax arrived on a silver tray. Mrs. Bernadette Sloane, mother of Miss Evadne March, formally requested the honour of receiving Duchess's Old Fairmorn at Rosemere Hall in Surrey before any engagement announcement was made. It was written with perfect manners and obvious ambition. Basil considered the invitation proof that everything would now heal. "They wish to welcome you properly," he said. "No," Isolde answered calmly. "They wish to impress me." That afternoon she sat alone in her private sitting room, where tea cooled untouched beside the fire. Beyond the windows, London mist clung to the gardens. She thought of Basil's trust, Ivardne's smile, and the future that waited if appearances continued untested. By evening her decision was made. The next morning, while Basil expected his mother to arrive later in full dignity, Isolde dismissed her lady's maid and opened an old wardrobe herself. From it she removed plain servant clothing once used during charitable visits to hospitals and kitchens, a dark dress without decoration, a simple apron, sturdy shoes, a modest cap to conceal her hair. She removed her rings one by one and placed them in a velvet box. When her loyal steward asked whether she was certain, Isolde fastened the final button at her wrist and looked into the mirror. The powerful Duchess disappeared. In her place stood a woman no one would notice. She lifted her gloves and said quietly, "Let us see how they treat those they believe beneath them." Rosemere Hall stood proudly on the Surrey countryside like a woman wearing borrowed jewels. Its stone walls were grand, its gardens trimmed into neat perfection, and its long gravel drive curved elegantly toward tall iron gates. From a distance it appeared every inch the home of ancient nobility. Up close, the illusion weakened. The statues near the fountain were newly carved and too bright. The family crest above the entrance had been recently mounted. The hedges were cut with such precision that they looked more expensive than natural. It was a beautiful house trying very hard to look old. At the rear entrance, deliveries of flowers, meat, pastries, and wine arrived one after another. Kitchen boys ran with baskets of bread. Footmen polished silver trays until their hands reamed. The house smelled of roasted duck, cinnamon tarts, fresh polish, and expensive perfume drifting down from the upper rooms. Into this chaos came a modest woman in plain servant's clothes carrying a small case. No jewels shone at her throat. No silk trailed behind her. Her hair was hidden beneath a simple cap, and her gloves were ordinary. She stood quietly at the servants' gate while rainwater clung to her sleeves. No one recognized Duchess Isolde Fairmorn. A stout housekeeper looked her over with quick disdain. "You are late." "I was told to report this morning," Isolde answered softly. "Then report less and move more. We are not running a convent." She was pushed inside without another glance. The servants' corridors were narrow and busy. Bells rang from drawing rooms above. Voices snapped through the halls. One maid carrying folded linen nearly collided with a footman and was cursed for her clumsiness. Another girl was scolded because a flower arrangement leaned slightly to one side. Fear moved through the house faster than air. At the center of it all was Mrs. Bernadette Sloane. She swept through the breakfast room in a satin gown heavy with lace, rings flashing as she pointed at everything wrong with the world. The table held smoked salon, eggs, fruit preserves, hot rolls, and silver coffee pots. Yet she found reason to complain over each item. "These strawberries look common, and who arranged those lies? Have they no eyes?" A trembling maid adjusted the flowers. Bernadette turned to a guest list beside her plate. "By this time next month, no one of consequence will ignore our invitations." She laughed at her own words. Later, passing a half-open morning room door, Isolde heard Bernadette speaking to a neighbor. "Old noble families are finished. Titles without money are museum pieces. We are the future now." The neighbor laughed politely. Upstairs, Miss Everdene March prepared for Basil's arrival. Isolde was sent with fresh tea and entered quietly enough to witness the young woman before the mirror. Everdene wore pale silk with pearls at her throat. Two maids pinned her hair while she practiced expressions one after another. Warm delight, modest surprise, gentle concern. She studied each smile carefully, choosing which would best capture Basil's heart. "Too eager," she murmured at her reflection. Then she softened her eyes and tried again. "Better." When she noticed Isolde in the room, her face sharpened at once. "Set it there and do not breathe on the tray." Isolde obeyed without comment. By noon the household was tense with expectation. Basil was expected any moment. His old was instructed to carry a silver pot of tea through the upper corridor toward the drawing room where Eveden waited. As she passed, the narrow edge of her shoe brushed the hem of Iden's gown. The sound of the slap cracked through the corridor. Gasps followed immediately. Tea rattled in its cups as his old staggered one step sideways, one hand rising slowly to her cheek. Red marks bloomed across skin that once had been kissed by kings at formal greeting. Evad stood rigid with fury. "You wretched creature, do not touch what you could never afford." The nearby servants lowered their eyes in horror. No one dared speak. His old straightened carefully. She lifted her gaze to Evaden's face. There was no pleading in her expression, no shame, no fear, only silence. Eveden mistook it for submission and smiled coldly. "Clean the tray and be useful." She swept away in silk and perfume. The corridor remained frozen until footsteps faded. A young maid beside the wall began to shake. Tears filled her eyes as she looked at the older woman who had endured the blow without a word. "Why did you not strike her back?" she whispered. Isolde adjusted her gloves with calm fingers and picked up the trembling teacups. "Because," she said quietly, "some debts grow larger when left unpaid." By early afternoon the rain had cleared, leaving Rosemere Hall washed in pale sunlight. Gravel glittered along the drive, and the household stiffened with anticipation when the sound of an engine rolled through the grounds. A polished dark motor car swept to the front entrance and stopped beneath the stone portico. A footman hurried forward to open the door. Lord Basil Thorncraft stepped out smiling. He wore a tailored charcoal coat, gloves of soft leather, and the easy confidence of a man certain the world was moving in his favor. He carried a bouquet of cream roses tied with silver ribbon, chosen because Ivadne once claimed they were her favorite. His eyes searched the doorway before he had fully straightened. Ivadne appeared at once. Only moments earlier she had been complaining that the soup spoons looked cheap. Now her face glowed with warmth. Her voice softened. She floated down the steps as though joy alone carried her. "Basil," she breathed. She kissed his cheek, accepted the flowers, and thanked the servants for their hard work loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. She even touched the shoulder of a frightened maid who had been trembling since morning. "You poor dear, do rest when you can," she said sweetly. The maid nearly stared. Basil looked at Ivadne with admiration so complete it bordered on worship. To him she was kindness, beauty, refinement, and future happiness wrapped in silk. From the side corridor, Duchess Isolde watched in servant dress. The sting of the slap still burned faintly on her cheek. A pale red mark remained visible beneath the edge of her cap. Basil's eyes passed over her without recognition, without pause, without concern. That wounded her more deeply than the blow itself. She had raised him, protected him, guided him through grief and youth. Yet now he could not see pain standing 2 steps away because beauty stood before him. Lunch was announced soon after. The family and selected guests gathered in the formal dining room beneath a painted ceiling. Roast pheasant, glazed carrots, buttered asparagus, warm rolls, clear conchs, and chilled custards were carried in by nervous staff. Isolde moved among them silently, serving plates and pouring wine. Basil laughed often. Bernadette praised his manners. Ivadne listened to him as though no other voice mattered. When the meal ended, the men stepped toward the library for cigars, while the ladies withdrew briefly to the morning room. Basil lingered behind to admire a carved cabinet near the hallway. In the narrow service corridor behind the room Isolde paused when she heard voices through the half-open door. Bernadette spoke first. "The boy is simpler than I hoped. He would sign away Scotland if asked nicely." Ivadne laughed lightly. "He is not foolish, merely eager to be adored. And once married, then Fairmorn House must be modernized. Those dreadful portraits of dead ancestors make the place smell of judgment." Bernadette chuckled. "And the Duchess, she can be settled comfortably at the Dare estate in Kent. Gardens, fresh air, endless quiet. Old women love being gently removed." They both laughed. Isolde's fingers tightened around the silver tray in her hands. Bernadette lowered her voice. "The jewels and accounts gradually," Ivadne replied. "One does not empty a vault by kicking the door. One is handed the key." Then she added with amusement, "Men inherit titles, women inherit men." More laughter followed. Bernadette asked, "And if the Duchess opposes you, Ivardny did not hesitate. Then the old woman will learn what all old women learn, that they are replaceable. At that exact moment, Basil stepped into the hall beyond the doorway. He heard only the last sentence and glanced toward the room. Inside, Bernadette had been pointing at a faded cabinet. Basil smiled faintly, assuming they discussed furniture. "That cabinet is dreadful. Replace it if you wish," he said as he entered. Ivardny rewarded him with a grateful look so tender it would have fooled a judge. Isolde closed her eyes for one brief second. Blindness, she realized, was easiest to wear when it pleased the wearer. She moved away before anyone noticed her listening. The house settled into a false calm. Guests returned to conversation. Bernadette rang for fresh tea. Basil stood beside Ivardny near the tall windows, entirely content. Then, from beyond the front lawns, a new sound broke across the afternoon. Engines, not one, several, heavy, powerful, approaching fast over the gravel drive. The rumble of engines rolled across the lawns like distant thunder, drawing every eye in Rosemere Hall toward the tall front windows. Conversation died mid-sentence. Teacups paused halfway to lips. Even the servants froze where they stood. 3 grand motor cars turned through the iron gates in perfect order and swept along the gravel drive. Their black bodies shone beneath the afternoon light, each door marked with the silver crest of Fairmorn House. Uniformed chauffeurs brought them to a smooth halt beneath the entrance portico. Guests exchanged startled glances. Bernadette Sloane's face brightened at once. She straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and adjusted the lace at her sleeves. To her mind, this was the public recognition she had long desired. The Fairmount household had come in full ceremony to honor the future bride. Ivardny touched the pearls at her throat and checked her reflection in the window glass. She smoothed the front of her gown and took Basil's arm possessively. "How thoughtful of your mother," she said sweetly. Basil, suddenly, uneasy, said nothing. The front doors opened. 2 senior footmen entered first, followed by the Fairmorn household secretary and several uniformed attendants. Their manner was formal, controlled, and severe enough to silence the room completely. Then the chief steward, Mr. Vale, stepped inside. He was a tall, silver-haired man whose face showed neither warmth nor impatience. He removed his gloves slowly and glanced across the room. Bernadette moved forward with a broad smile. "Mr. Vale. What an honor. Please inform Her Grace that he walked past her as though she were furniture." Bernadette's smile cracked. Ivardny stiffened. Mr. Vale continued across the drawing room, past guests, past Basil, past the marble fireplace until he stopped before the plainly dressed maid standing near the tea service. Every eye followed him. Then he bowed deeply. "Her Grace, Duchess is sold Fairmorn." The room erupted in stunned gasps. For one suspended moment, no one moved. Then the maid, who had stood unnoticed all day, straightened slowly. She removed the plain cap from her head, revealing silver-streaked hair arranged with quiet elegance. She unfastened the rough outer collar, exposing the fine cut of the dark dress beneath. Her posture changed first, then the room around her. The servant vanished. Power remained. Duchess is sold Fairmorn stood before them. Several servants dropped to their knees at once. One maid began to cry openly. Another crossed herself in panic. Bernadette swayed so hard she had to grip the edge of a chair. Basil's face drained of color. Ivardny stumbled backward until the backs of her legs struck a sofa. Her lips parted, but no words came. Isolde lifted one gloved hand and touched the fading red mark on her cheek. Her voice, when it came, was calm enough to terrify. "Your daughter strikes with poor aim." No one in the room dared breathe. Bernadette rushed forward, hands shaking. "Your Grace, there has been some dreadful misunderstanding." "There has. You mistook breeding for costume." She turned to Mr. Veal. "Bring forward every servant who witnessed this morning." The household staff were assembled in a trembling line near the doorway, faces pale, hands clasped, eyes lowered. "Speak truthfully, you answer to me now." The first maid described the slap in the corridor. The second told how Bernadette had insulted staff since dawn. A footman repeated hearing Basil boast of controlling Ivard after marriage. The housekeeper, white with fear, confessed that she had been ordered to treat poorer visitors through the rear entrance, so the quality of the house remained visible. Another maid spoke through tears of hearing plans to remove the Duchess to a distant Dare estate and gain access to jewels and accounts. Each statement landed like a hammer. Bernadette's protests grew weaker. Ivadne tried to deny everything, but no one looked at her with belief anymore. Basil stood motionless, staring first at Ivadne, then on the mother he had failed to recognize beneath a servant's cap. At last he stepped forward, his breathing uneven. "Mother." Isolde did not turn. He sank to his knees before her, shame written across every line of his face. Still she did not look at him. No one moved after Basil fell to his knees. The great drawing room of Rosemere Hall, so carefully prepared for triumph, now felt smaller than a prison cell. Crystal glasses stood untouched on silver trays. Tea had gone cold, the scent of lies mixed with fear. Duchess Isolde Fairmorn regarded the room with steady eyes. "Let this be settled plainly," she said. Her voice was quiet, yet every person heard it as clearly as a bell. "The engagement between Lord Basil Thorncraft and Miss Ivadne March is ended immediately." A sharp cry escaped Bernadette. Ivadne lurched forward. "Your Grace, please." Isolde raised one gloved hand, and the room fell silent again. "Lord Basil Thorncraft will be removed for a time from all inheritance decisions and management of Fairmorn affairs until he learns judgment equal to privilege." Basil lowered his head further. "Rosemere Hall," Isolde continued, "stands upon debts discreetly financed through Fairmorn banking interests. Those debts will now be called in according to contract." Bernadette's knees buckled against a chair. "And before nightfall," Isolde said, "society newspapers shall receive an accurate account of the conduct displayed in this house today." The word struck harder than any sentence of law. In their world, scandal could close doors faster than bankruptcy. Bernadette rushed forward, weeping, her pride shattered at last. "Mercy, Your Grace, we were misjudged. We were anxious to impress. My daughter is young. She is old enough to wound others for sport." Isolde replied. Ivadne dropped beside her mother, tears spilling across her powdered cheeks. She reached toward Basil first, then toward Isolde when he did not move. "I loved him. I spoke foolishly. I was nervous. I did not mean any of it." No one believed tears that arrived after witnesses. Basil rose slowly. His face looked years older than it had that morning. He stared at Ivadne as if seeing her for the first time, then turned to his mother. "I failed you," he said hoarsely. "I chose beauty over character. I defended lies because I wished them true." The room waited. Isolde met his eyes at last. "A foolish heart may recover," she said. "A cruel one rarely does." Basil bowed his head in shame. She turned and left Rosemere Hall without another glance at the March family. Her staff followed in perfect order. Basil walked behind them like a man attending his own funeral. The consequences arrived exactly as promised. Within days, London papers carried elegant but devastating reports of disorder at Rosemere Hall. Invitations ceased. Calls were unanswered. Families who once praised Ivadne suddenly remembered other engagements. Shopkeepers who had extended generous credit became strict men of business. Months later the debts were enforced. Rosemere Hall with its bright statues and borrowed grandeur was seized and sold. Its furnishings were catalogued room by room. Bernadette left through the rear entrance she once reserved for others. Ivadne became the scandal of the season. Her name was spoken in drawing rooms with raised brows and lowered voices. Suitors vanished. Friends disappeared. Even those who pied her did so from a distance. Basil returned to Fairmorn House under no illusion of favour. For a year he handled estate accounts under supervision, visited tenant farms in Winterrain, and worked quietly among veterans' charities his mother supported. He learned names of gardeners, cooks, and stable boys he once passed without notice. Pride left him slowly, but it left. Spring came again to London. In the gardens of Fairmorn House, white roses opened beside trimmed hedges and gravel paths still damp from morning dew. Duchess Isolde walked with the young maid, who once had trembled in Rosemere Hall's corridor. The girl now wore a neat dark coat and carried books beneath one arm. Isolde had arranged lessons in reading, numbers, and household management along with a respectable new position in the Fairmorn household. They paused beside a fountain. "Your Grace," said the girl softly, "after what they did, why did you show mercy to anyone at all?" Isolde looked across the garden where Basil's sleeves rolled was helping an elderly groundsman lift seed trays into the sun. "Because power," she said, "is not proven by how one is treated, but how one treats others." The maid smiled. Beyond the hedges, Basil turned as a carriage arrived at the front drive. A young woman stepped down carrying a basket of books for the estate school. It was the same maid who had seen everything on that terrible day. And as London still spoke of the fallen bride, another woman quietly entered Basil's life. If you enjoyed this story, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next royal drama. Tell us in the comments, did Basil deserve a second chance, or was the Duchess right to punish him? And let us know where you are watching from and what time you finished this story. Until next time, remember, pride may wear diamonds, but character wears forever.